A stray dog refused to leave the church steps, growling protectively with something small and bloodied in its mouth. No one knew where it came from, until it led the priest into the woods and uncovered a secret that would shake the entire town. Here's what happened, but before we get into the story, drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from. The Howl at Dawn. The sleepy town of Willow Creek stirred under a gray blanket of fog, the kind that clings to rooftops and crawls between gravestones like ghostly breath. Inside the worn stone walls of St. Gabriel's Church, Father Leo lit the final candle on the altar, whispering his morning prayer, when the sound sliced through the stillness. A long, aching howl that sent a chill up his spine. He paused, breath caught halfway between sacred verse and concern, and turned toward the great oak doors. Outside, the mist swirled like a living thing, and there it was. Outlined against the early dawn, fur matted and glistening with rain, stood a dog that didn't belong to anyone. Not in this town, not on that doorstep. It was large but gaunt, ribs showing through its mud-caked coat, eyes wide with a pleading desperation that didn't match its wild appearance. But what rooted Father Leo to the spot wasn't the dog's presence. It was what it carried. Clenched delicately in its jaws, like a mother with a newborn, was something soft, pink, and horribly out of place. A baby blanket, soaked and torn, the faintest trace of red along the edges. Time seemed to slow. The priest stepped forward, cautiously opening the door a crack. The dog growled, not threateningly, but low and warning, as if guarding something sacred. "Easy now," Leo murmured, hand raised gently, his voice catching. The dog didn't move. It stood as if commanded by some unseen force, eyes fixed on him, tail still, muscles trembling. Then it lay down, curling around the blanket like a mother protecting her child, and released a sound that wasn't quite a whimper, but something older, deeper, grief carved into breath. For a moment, Father Leo simply watched, helpless in the face of whatever tragedy this creature had endured. Then instinct kicked in. He stepped back, heart hammering, grabbed the phone from the vestibule, and called the sheriff's office. "It's Leo," he said, voice low and shaky. "You'd better send someone. There's a dog outside, and I think it's trying to tell us something." Within minutes, the church steps filled with flashing red and blue, tires crunching wet gravel, voices low and urgent. Deputy Marlowe was the first to approach, her hand resting on her holster, but her face softening as she took in the scene. The dog didn't flinch, didn't growl, just stared at her, unblinking, as if waiting. Marla knelt slowly, eyes narrowing at the tattered blanket now smeared with mud and something darker. "What the hell happened to you?" she whispered. But the dog gave no answer. It just stood, then turned, and with a look back that chilled them both, padded slowly toward the trees. It stopped once, waiting, an invitation, a warning. And in that moment, both the priest and the deputy knew this wasn't just about a stray. Something had happened. Something terrible. And the only one who knew the truth was the dog, the thing in its mouth. Father Leo's breath came in short, uneven gasps as he took another hesitant step toward the animal, his aging knees trembling beneath his robe. The dog's eyes never left him, deep amber pools filled with something far too human. Fear, urgency, and a kind of silent pleading that made his skin crawl. The growl in his throat was steady, more protective than hostile, a sound that vibrated in the damp morning air like the low hum of something ancient and primal. Leo crouched slowly, hands open, palms facing the dog in a universal gesture of peace. That's when he saw it clearly. What at first he thought might be a mangled toy or a soiled towel was in fact something far more unsettling. It was unmistakably a baby blanket, the soft kind with little yellow ducks stitched into the faded fabric, now soiled and frayed, smeared with streaks of brown mud, and something darker, redder, that told of pain and panic. One of the corners was chewed ragged, the fabric clutched delicately between the dog's stained teeth like it was the last fragile thing holding together a shattered world. Father Leo recoiled, breath catching in his throat, eyes blurring with unspoken horror. He had buried infants before. Accidents, illnesses, tragedies no parent should ever face. But nothing in his decades of service had prepared him for this. He stumbled back, fingers fumbling for his rosary, making the sign of the cross with shaking hands, before he turned and hurried inside, his voice breaking as he dialed the sheriff's number with a trembling finger. "Sheriff Gaines," he stammered, "it's Leo. You need to send someone now. There's a dog here, outside the church. It has a baby blanket in its mouth. There's blood. Something's very wrong." Minutes later, the stillness was shattered by the crunch of gravel under fast approaching wheels. A cruiser pulled up, and Deputy Marla stepped out, face alert but unreadable, scanning the scene with trained eyes. She knelt beside the priest, who pointed silently, hand shaking toward the chapel steps. The dog was still there, unmoving, a sentinel made of muscle and mud and silent resolve. Marla approached cautiously, one hand brushing the taser at her hip, the other extended slowly, fingers twitching in subtle reassurance. "Hey, buddy," she said softly. "It's okay. We're here to help." The dog's ears twitched, but it didn't budge. Its body low to the ground, coiled like a spring, still clutching the blanket with a mother's fierce devotion. Marla dropped to her knees, eyes narrowing as she examined the blood-stained fabric, the unmistakable pattern of tiny ducks peeking through the grime. Her voice lowered, almost a whisper. "This isn't just a blanket. This is a message." She looked back at Father Leo, her face pale, "And I think it's asking us to follow." The dog stood then, slow and deliberate, the blanket still hanging from its jaws, and turned toward the woods. It paused once, looking back, eyes locking with Leo's in a moment that felt sacred. Then it walked into the mist, disappearing between the trees. Neither priest nor deputy hesitated. They followed. Because in that moment, they both knew something out there was waiting to be found. Or someone. A body in the woods. The moment the dog turned toward the woods, tail stiff, blanket still dangling from its mouth, something shifted in the air. A tension, thick and electric, that clung to every branch and shadow like the breath of something unseen. Marla hesitated only a second, protocol screaming in her ear. But instinct won. She glanced at Father Leo, whose face had gone pale, his eyes locked on the animal like he was watching a miracle in motion. They moved together, the priest clutching his coat tighter as the cold crept in under the trees, the deputy's boots squelching through wet leaves and moss. The dog moved with precision, not like it wandered, but like it remembered. It would trot a few paces, then stop and glance back as if to make sure they were still following, and every time Marla met its eyes, she felt it. Urgency, desperation, a kind of silent cry that pierced deeper than sound. 50 yards in, the forest seemed to change. The trees closed in, hunched and watchful, the underbrush thicker, the light dimmer despite the rising sun. And then the dog stopped. It dropped the blanket at the foot of a gnarled oak and whimpered, a high, keening sound that twisted in Marla's chest like a blade. She stepped closer, eyes scanning, hand hovering near her weapon, when she saw it. A shape, half buried under a haphazard covering of sticks and damp leaves. At first, it looked like discarded clothing, or maybe trash, but as she drew near, her breath caught. It was a woman. Young, face bruised and pale, mud in her hair, clothes torn and soaked through. Her arms were curled protectively around something, and for one terrible second, Marla feared the worst. But it wasn't a body, it was a baby carrier. Empty. Her hands clutched it like a lifeline, knuckles white despite the cold. "Oh my God," Leo whispered, falling to his knees beside her. Marla dropped her hand to the woman's throat, searching there, faint, thready. But it was a pulse. "She's alive," Marla said, fumbling for her radio. "We've got a woman, unconscious, hypothermic. I need an ambulance now. Coordinates coming." The dog lay down beside the woman, its head resting on her shoulder, eyes fixed on the carrier, like it understood what was missing. Marla keyed in the location, every second stretching like a lifetime. The forest suddenly too quiet, too still. The woman stirred, barely, her lips parting to let out a sound too soft to be words. But she said something. Marla leaned in. "Baby," the woman whispered, eyes fluttering but not opening. "He took the baby." The words hit like a gunshot. Not lost, not gone. Taken. Marla's eyes shot to the dog, now standing again, ears perked, gaze flicking deeper into the woods. This wasn't over, it was just beginning. And now they weren't just following a stray. They were chasing a stolen life, a silent witness. The helicopter blades thundered above the treetops as the paramedics raced through the forest clearing, their boots crunching over wet earth and fallen branches. But the dog didn't flinch. It stood guard beside the woman's fragile body, muscles taut, growling low whenever anyone stepped too close, a barrier of fur and fury around someone it wasn't supposed to know, but somehow chosen to protect. Marla held up her hand to halt the medics. "Easy," she warned, eyes on the dog. "Let me." She crouched low, her voice steady but soft, the kind used with scared children and feral animals alike. "Hey, I know you're scared. We're here to help her, okay? You brought us here. Now let us finish it." The growl died to a low rumble, and the dog looked at her, ears twitching as if weighing her soul, then took a single step back, barely enough space for the EMTs to lift the woman onto the stretcher. But as they moved her, the dog followed, circling, pacing, panting, as if tethered to her by something stronger than rope or leash. They loaded her onto the chopper, and when the door began to close, the dog barked sharply, pawing at the edge. "We can't take the dog!" one of the medics shouted over the roar. "Regulations!" Marla stepped in. "You want regulations, call the sheriff, but that dog stays with her." And somehow, despite the chaos, despite the procedures, the dog ended up huddled at the woman's feet, fur rippling in the wind, as the chopper lifted from the clearing and soared toward St. Mercy Hospital. At the hospital, it was more of the same. Orderlies, nurses, even security, all found themselves face to face with a force of nature that refused to leave the woman's side. It snarled at scrubs, bared teeth at syringes, and growled at machines that beeped too loudly. But when the woman groaned, shifting beneath the oxygen mask, the dog whimpered and licked her hand with a gentleness that made every nurse pause. No collar, no tags, no chip. Animal control ran every check. Nothing. It wasn't just that the dog had no name. It was as if it had appeared out of nowhere, born from the storm and the mud and some invisible thread of fate. Marla watched from the hallway, arms folded tight across her chest, thoughts spiraling. This wasn't just a lucky encounter. The dog hadn't stumbled across the woman. It had known where she was, had gone for help, had picked the church steps for a reason. But how? And more urgently, where was the baby? Because now that they had the mother, now that she was stabilized and whispering fragments of a nightmare they couldn't yet understand, the dog had started pacing again, restless, anxious. Its eyes locked on the exit as if it knew its work wasn't done. Marla's gut twisted. Whatever this dog had witnessed, whatever it had survived, it wasn't over. Not until the child was found, and the dog, the silent witness, was ready to lead again. Secrets in the rain. The rain didn't let up, not for a minute. Pounding against the windows of St. Mercy Hospital like nature itself refused to let the town rest. Inside room 204, the woman, identified only as Claire, from a soaked driver's license tucked in her back pocket, drifted in and out of shallow sleep, her forehead slick with fever, and her hands twitching in dreams she never spoke aloud. Sheriff Gaines paced the hallway, jaw tight, frustration mounting as bits and pieces of a story began to take shape, jagged and incomplete. Claire had been on the run, that much was clear. Fleeing a man with a record sealed tight by out-of-state courts and a reputation whispered through battered women's shelters. She was headed to a safe house 2 counties away, a place that promised protection and anonymity, but she never made it. Somewhere between the storm and the back roads, the world came crashing down, and now she was left with broken memories and the echo of a child's cry. Taken by the water, she whispered one night, voice barely a breath as Marla leaned over her bedside. He chased us. We crashed. I held on, but the current, her voice cracked and she turned her face to the wall, a single tear tracing down her bruised cheek. But it didn't make sense. No reports of a car wreck, no footprints washed out near the creek, no sign of the baby, alive or otherwise, and the only clue they had was a dog with no name and a gaze that refused to look away from the river. Every time they passed near it, whether by patrol or on foot, the dog would stop cold, ears stiff, body vibrating with unease. It barked not in warning, but in demand, as if begging someone to understand what it already knew. Marla began taking it with her each morning, walking the banks in silence while the dog darted ahead, nose to the wind, pausing at strange intervals, as though listening for something long gone. And then there were the scratches, fresh on its side as if from thorns or something worse, and a small patch of its coat stained with the trace of rusted red that hadn't been there before. Gaines ordered divers into the river, but the current was strong and visibility near zero. We're not looking for a body, he muttered, but the doubt in his voice betrayed him. Still, the dog didn't give up. Every day it returned to the same stretch of muddy bank near the old wooden bridge, standing there for hours, unmoving, eyes fixed on the water like it was waiting for something to rise up or be brought back. Marla watched it one evening as the rain slashed sideways and lightning lit the horizon. It sat soaked, silent, and utterly resolute, and she felt something in her chest stir. Maybe it was foolish, maybe it was grief latching onto hope, but something told her the dog hadn't given up, because there was still something to find. And maybe, just maybe, someone's still alive and into the current. 3 days had passed since the woman was pulled from the forest, and in that time, the dog had been locked behind steel and concrete at the county shelter, pacing like a prisoner in a cell too small for its purpose, eyes constantly darting to the door as if waiting for a call. It couldn't hear, but still somehow expected. Then, just before dawn, the lock was found twisted, the gate ajar, and the kennel empty. No one could explain it. The security footage had been fogged by the storm. Sensors failed to register movement, and it was as if the dog had simply vanished into thin air. But Marla knew better. She didn't even wait for dispatch. She grabbed her coat, keys, and flashlight, the rain already needling her face as she sped toward the riverbank, heart pounding, thoughts racing. The same stretch, the same bend, where the dog always stopped and stared like it was staring into a memory it couldn't let go. When she got there, the river was swollen, angry, churning with brown water and broken limbs, its surface jagged and violent under the weight of the rain. And there, just beyond the tree line, was the dog, soaked and trembling, perched at the water's edge, with its paws in the mud and its voice splitting the storm with frantic, desperate barks. Marla shouted, stumbling out of the cruiser, feet sinking into the muck as she sprinted down the slope, flashlight slicing through mist and shadows. The dog barked louder, turning toward her, then back to the river, again and again, until finally, her eyes followed its gaze. At first, it was just a flash of color, something pink, caught between the twisted arms of a downed tree, tangled midstream. Then her breath stopped. It was a baby blanket, not just any. The same one from the dog's mouth, now tangled around something fragile, something impossibly still. Marla dropped to her knees, boots splashing, the cold soaking through to her skin as she plunged forward into the water without hesitation. The current pulled hard, almost toppling her, but adrenaline carried her farther, deeper, until her hands found the bundle wedged against a thick branch. She grabbed it, sobbing, clutching it to her chest, heart hammering as she turned toward the shore. The dog was still there, whimpering now, pacing, tail thrashing. Marla collapsed on the bank, peeling back the soaked blanket with shaking fingers, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Please, please." And then it happened, a small cough, barely more than a gurgle, a blink, a quiver of blue lips. Alive. The baby was alive, cold, limp, on the edge of life, but breathing. She cried out, cradling the child to her chest as tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. Behind her, the dog sat down and finally stopped barking. It just watched, eyes soft, tail still, as if it had known all along this moment would come. And in that moment, Marla no longer questioned the impossible. Because sometimes, in a world torn by cruelty and silence, it takes a creature without words to carry a miracle into the light, the town that held its breath. The news swept through Willow Creek like a spark on dry leaves, igniting something deep and unspoken in the hearts of everyone who heard it. Miracle Baby Saved by Stray Dog wasn't just a headline, it was a lifeline. A story too pure for the bitter world they all quietly endured. And suddenly, people who hadn't been to church in years found themselves lighting candles on the steps of St. Gabriel's, leaving flowers, knitted blankets, and small notes soaked with tears. The church doors stayed open around the clock, and Father Leo, who once feared empty pews more than fading faith, found himself surrounded by voices once lost to silence, murmuring prayers not for salvation, but for thanks. At St. Mercy Hospital, the baby, now affectionately dubbed Hope by the nurses, slept beneath soft white lights, her tiny chest rising and falling like the whisper of a hymn. Monitored closely, but no longer in danger, she had weathered the storm, the current, and whatever darkness had tried to claim her. And through it all, the dog remained, not at the foot of the hospital bed or in some quiet kennel, but beside the crib itself, curled tightly against the metal bars, its head resting on its paws, eyes half closed in a vigilant trance that never truly broke. Staff tried to coax it away, offering treats, soft words, even grilled chicken snuck from the cafeteria. But nothing worked. It wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink. Not unless the baby cried, not unless her voice pierced the sterile stillness of the room and cracked through its guarded heart. Then, and only then, would it move, nudging her tiny hand with a damp nose, licking the tips of her fingers as if reminding her that she was not alone. Not now, not ever again. Nurses whispered to one another in hushed reverence. "It's like a guardian angel," one said, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Like it's been waiting for her," another added, her voice trembling. No one dared move it. No one wanted to. Sheriff Gaines came once, standing silently in the doorway as he watched the dog protect the infant it had refused to abandon. He said nothing, only nodded once before turning and walking back into the storm. Shaken by something deeper than duty, Marla visited every day. She brought toys, fresh blankets, and sometimes just sat beside the crib, watching the dog sleep, wondering if she'd ever understand how a nameless creature found the one thing no one else could. And through it all, the town held its breath, not out of fear or suspense, but awe. For once, it wasn't politics or crime or scandal drawing their gaze. It was a story of loyalty, of resilience, of something lost and found again in the most unlikely of heroes. And though no one said it out loud, they all felt it. That maybe, just maybe, this dog hadn't saved a life. Maybe it had saved them all. Footsteps from the past. The sun had barely risen when the black SUV rolled into Willow Creek, tires too smooth, windows too tinted, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong on roads still slick from storm runoff and lined with pickup trucks and worn sedans. He stepped out like a man who knew how to manipulate a room before ever speaking a word. Clean-shaven, tailored jacket, hair combed back like a politician walking into a fundraiser. To the untrained eye, he was just a concerned father searching for his child. But Marla saw through the polished exterior in an instant. The way his eyes scanned the hospital with calculation instead of concern, the casual smirk he gave when handed visitor protocols, and the way the dog, who had not barked once since the baby was found, rose from the side of the crib with a snarl so sharp it made even seasoned nurses stumble back. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stared the dog down until Marla stepped between them, her hand on the badge pinned to her chest and her voice sharp with quiet steel. "You'll wait outside. Visiting hours don't apply to court cases under investigation." He tilted his head, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sheriff's Department doesn't scare me, officer. That's my daughter in there. Marla didn't budge. And she nearly died under your watch. That wiped the smile from his face. Court proceedings moved fast, too fast for Marla's liking. But the man had money, a lawyer with slick hair and slicker words, and just enough paperwork to throw doubt into a system already stretched thin. Claire, still recovering but more alert by the day, testified through tears. Her voice cracked as she recounted the fear, the isolation, the bruises hidden by sleeves and shame. She spoke of a night that started with shouting and ended with a crashed car, a rushing river, and the desperate hope that someone, anyone, would find them. He said no one would believe me, she whispered on the stand, clutching a tissue like it was her last anchor. He said he'd take her, and I'd disappear. The courtroom fell silent, but the weight of her words did little to sway a judge who only saw missing reports, hospital bills, and conflicting timelines. That's when Father Leo stood, not as a witness, but as a voice for a town that refused to forget. From the pulpit that Sunday, he spoke not of doctrine or scripture, but of decency. Evil wears many faces, he said, his voice echoing through the stone walls. Sometimes it smiles, sometimes it files legal petitions. But we know what's right, and no child should be returned to the hands that drove her mother into the storm and left her to die. The town responded, not with pitchforks or protest signs, but with signatures, testimonies, and quiet, unwavering presence. They packed the courtroom. They stood behind Claire, and when the dog was brought in to show the child's reaction, how her tiny arms reached for it, how she laughed for the first time in days, the judge leaned back, brow furrowed, and reconsidered. Because no matter what the papers said, sometimes love isn't proven by blood, but by who shows up when everything else falls away. Testimony of the heart. The courtroom was silent, save for the soft ticking of an old wall clock and the occasional rustle of paper from the clerk's desk. Claire sat straight. In the witness chair, her hair neatly tied back, her clothes simple and clean. But her hands trembled in her lap, fingers locking and unlocking in silent rhythm. She had waited weeks for this moment, weeks of healing wounds, both visible and hidden, of watching her baby sleep under soft hospital lights, of listening to nurses whisper about court dates and custody battles as if love could be measured in documents and time served. The judge, a man whose gray eyes had seen too many broken families and too few honest endings, nodded for her to begin. Her voice cracked on the first word, but she didn't stop. I ran because I knew if I stayed, I wouldn't survive. And neither would she. She spoke of control that masqueraded as care, of isolation that dressed itself in protection, of nights spent praying that one day she'd have the strength to walk away. He told me no one would believe me, she continued, her voice steadier now, that I was unfit, unstable. But the only time I ever felt unsafe was with him. The baby stirred in the arms of a nurse, in the back row, as if sensing her mother's voice through walls of doubt and paper. Then came the question that lingered like a blade above the room. How did your child survive the flood? Claire didn't answer right away. She looked down, exhaled, and reached her hand to the floor where the dog sat, calm and silent, its fur brushed and clean, but its eyes still filled with something ancient and aching. He did, she said softly, placing her hand on the dog's back. I don't know how he found us. I don't know why he stayed, but when I woke up half buried in the woods, he was the only reason I was still alive. And when I couldn't move, he carried her blanket all the way to the church. He didn't stop until she was found. The judge's pen hovered above the paper. The room didn't breathe. Even the opposing counsel, smug and polished, found himself without a rebuttal. Then, slowly, the judge leaned forward, folding his hands, his voice low and measured. In all my years on this bench, I've seen a lot of arguments. I've read affidavits, I've watched depositions, I've weighed every corner of truth and fabrication. But sometimes, he said, glancing at the baby cooing quietly in the nurse's arms. The heart tells a story no paper can capture. He looked at Claire. Your daughter will remain with you. Full custody. Effective immediately. A collective breath filled the room. One held for too long, now released like a benediction. Claire wept quietly, her hand still on the dog's back. The baby laughed, a high, sweet sound that bounced off the wooden walls like a bell. The danger had not vanished. But it had been named, faced, and for now turned away. And at the center of it all sat a silent witness, a nameless protector, who asked for nothing and had already given everything the name she chose. The courthouse doors creaked open and spilled a stream of warmth into the cold afternoon air, and as Claire stepped outside with her baby wrapped snug in a pale blue blanket, the sky above Willow Creek let loose the first snowfall of the season. Flakes drifted gently through the air like ash from some holy fire, softening the hard edges of the courthouse steps, catching in her hair, melting on her cheeks. The dog was already waiting, tail sweeping the stone as it saw them emerge, rising to its feet and trotting forward with a purpose that had never faltered since that day in the woods. Cameras clicked, journalists leaned in with notepads and eager eyes, voices tangled in a flurry of questions. But the world narrowed for Claire to one tiny moment. The baby's laughter as the dog nuzzled her cheek, and the way the child reached out, fingers tangled in the animal's fur like she was gripping a memory her body hadn't forgotten. Miss Claire, someone called out. What's the dog's name? Claire turned, blinking back tears that stung from wind and weight, her arms tightening protectively around her daughter, as she looked down at the creature that had become more guardian than pet. Its eyes met hers, not with expectation, but with peace, like it had never cared about a name until now, like it only wanted to know it had done enough. She swallowed the lump in her throat and said it so softly that only those closest heard the word at first. Mercy. The name hung in the air like incense, light and solemn, drifting upward into the cold white sky as if to stake its place in something eternal. Because when I had nothing left, Claire said, her voice breaking, when I thought we were already gone, it was mercy that found us. The reporters quieted, cameras lowered. Even the wind seemed to hush for a moment, letting the snow fall in perfect silence around the woman, her child, and the stray that was no longer a stray. Father Leo stood just behind the crowd, hands in his coat pockets, nodding once to himself. Marla watched from the edge of the steps, eyes rimmed red, her lips pressed into a thin line that trembled with the weight of everything that had led to this. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Mercy, because no other word could explain how a creature with no voice had spoken the loudest, had carried life in its teeth and grief in its growl, had led them through the dark and demanded nothing in return. Mercy, because not all angels have wings, and not every savior leaves footprints you can follow. Claire lowered to her knees and let the dog lean in close, her baby's fingers curling once more into its fur as if completing a promise neither of them would ever understand in words. And as the snow thickened, covering the town in a quiet blanket of forgiveness, Mercy sat between them, still and proud, the name finally his, but the grace behind it always theirs.